Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation has expressed deep concern over the worsening conflict in Sudan, where fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces has left thousands displaced and civilians bearing the brunt of the violence. DIRCO condemned the latest attack on Al-Fasher in North Darfur, with heavy shelling on residential areas and a busy marketplace, which claimed at least 24 lives and injured dozens more, including women. Now, Pretoria has reiterated its calls for an immediate ceasefire, the protection of civilians, and the urgent delivery of humanitarian aid, warning that the conflict poses a grave threat to regional stability. This also comes as DIRCO has called for a Sudanese-led and inclusive dialogue. Joining me now to discuss this, she's no stranger to us at Hilaal TV. It's Professor Amira Osman, who is the South African Research Chair in Spatial Transformation at the Tshwane University of Technology, and she's also a Sudanese citizen. Prof, always good having you on. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmah. Thank you so much for us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Prof, just your initial reaction to that statement from DIRCO.
So our initial reaction must be appreciation to the South African government for recognizing this, for shedding light on this matter. And it's a war that has largely been neglected by global media and many other governments and organizations. So this is a very welcome step taken by the South African government.
Prof, I want to talk on what is currently happening in Al-Fasher, because the violence has gone from bad to worse. What we have seen is that the RSF have been using drones to go ahead and attack the very population of Al-Fasher and many other parts of North Darfur. Talk to us about just the intensity at which these attacks are coming from the RSF.
Fahraz, I would like to, with your permission, perhaps elaborate a little bit more on the government's position.
Sure. No problem. Please do go ahead.
And then, because Al-Fasher is it's a very big tragedy at the moment. And if I can just offer some reflections on the government statement, and then we can jump into Al-Fasher. Sure. So the call for a Sudanese-led dialogue is without any doubt something that we appreciate. But if I may offer one very critical reflection on the statement, is that in the call for a Sudanese-led dialogue, it seems that there's often an understanding that there's two generals in this conflict, Hemedti and Burhan, yes. And those two parties need to come together in dialogue. The problem is the RSF, or the Rapid Support Forces, under the leadership of Hemedti, is a terrorist organization in our opinion, and we're hoping that more and more organizations and governments globally will come to realize and label it as such. That is, and you know, if the South African government would in the future kind of issue more statements, we as Sudanese are hoping that would be clear in that. The Sudanese armed forces under the leadership of Burhan, and currently the de facto government in the country, is, despite all of its very bad history, brutal legacy, it is still the official entity in the Sudan, and with any kind of disruption to the Sudanese armed forces, the Sudan as a state would disintegrate. So we're just finding that distinction between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces, the two warring parties, is not very clear in the statement. And to bring the Sudanese into a Sudanese-led dialogue, I just want to make a comparison with the South African situation when, during the South African change, there was a dialogue between various parties. But in that dialogue, the whole world was condemning the apartheid government. So I think that's, entering into those dialogues, hopefully they'll happen, and perhaps South Africa could become a facilitator for that. But we cannot really accept that the RSF is equated with the army because of their very brutal modus operandi. And we believe that they need to be condemned as terrorists, but that doesn't mean we don't look forward to a Sudanese-led dialogue. I hope that comparison makes sense to you.
No, definitely. And here's the thing, Prof. You've mentioned, of course, the RSF. And when the last time I spoke to you, we had spoken on the decision that had come from the ICJ that the United Arab Emirates was not involved. And again, which we're taking just on this ICJ decision, was not involved in supplying arms and other aspects to the RSF. So you've mentioned, of course, that RSF and what they are doing right now in terms of the attacks on many of the Sudanese citizens. How much does the UAE, and I want to bring this from a global perspective, need to come to the party based on these allegations that they have with supplying weapons to the RSF, but also some sort of a facilitator in this? Does the UAE have a place in this? And I bring this because the UAE is also part of BRICS, which South Africa is part of. I see you shaking your head, so maybe you can elaborate on that, Prof. Yeah.
It's incredibly important to understand that the court dismissed the case on technicality. I don't think that the court reached any conclusion in terms of the United Arab Emirates being involved or supplying weapons or not. The United Arab Emirates dismissed the case as is, so there was really no resolution arrived at. So I think it would be a little bit inaccurate to say that the court kind of reached a judgment that the United Arab Emirates is not supplying weapons. So that's a very important detail to mention. There is no doubt that the Rapid Support Forces are receiving incredible support from outside forces. And as someone once wrote, that if the supply of weapons to the RSF stops today, the war would stop today. So there's no doubt global forces and the complicity of the United Arab Emirates to a great extent has been well documented. So that's just something to mention. And maybe just a final point here, that gold, land, gum arabic, those are the resources that there's regional players that have their eyes on these resources, and not only just have their eyes on them, but despite the war, those supply chains that take these resources outside of the country are still going on, and they also have their eyes on the water, the Nile water, and the very valuable land that Sudan has. So those are the apologies. Those are the global forces that are without a doubt having a great impact on this war. And it's a similar situation to other African conditions. In a longer conversation, one could elaborate on that.
Prof, I want to go back to Al-Fasher because we've seen deadly attacks occurring, especially in that part within North Darfur. Why is it, and of course this is occurring throughout the entire parts of Darfur, but I want to focus on Al-Fasher. Why specifically there has the RSF decided to launch many of its brutal attacks?
So remember, at one point in the war, the RSF had captured the majority of the Sudan. And everywhere that they captured, there was terror, there was rape, there were assassinations, there was complete destruction of infrastructure. So an army started regaining those lands gradually until it regained, it was a big symbolic move, the capital Khartoum. So, and everywhere that the RSF was chased out by the army, People came back to their homes, yes, looted and destroyed, but they came back, they're rebuilding, schools opened, hospitals were functioning. Those are the army-controlled zones. But they literally had to push back the RSF. They pushed them westward, and now the west of Sudan is still a disputed territory. That's why the fighting is still happening there, and that's why many Sudanese are returning. Massive numbers of Sudanese are returning from Egypt, as an example, where they had escaped, and they're reopening their homes and businesses. But the RSF was pushed west, so now the Al-Fashir is being it's literally what's happening there is what was happening in a lot of Sudan.
Sure.
But the tragedy of Al-Fashir is that the fighting between the army, their allies, and the rapid support forces has just gone on for too long. The same thing happened, for example, to some of our families in northern Sudan. But the fighting did not continue as long. So here, Al-Fashir, its biggest tragedy now is the famine. And we've also been trying through donations to get people out of Al-Fashir because food is running out. The animal feed that they were eating is running out. But there's no one force in Al-Fashir that has won. And once, if I may share this.
Dr. Osman, I may have to stop you there because we have to go for a break. But my conversation with Professor Amira Osman continues. Should South Africa be playing a larger role in ending that civil war in Sudan? We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Professor Amira Osman on DIRCO's statement with regards to a Sudanese-led and inclusive dialogue. Prof, you were continuing, of course, just giving us a breakdown on Al-Fashir. I've got 2 minutes to give you with regards to that. Please do go ahead.
Yes, Al-Fashir, I believe, must be on everyone's mind, on all news media. It is an absolute tragedy with regards to them being caught in a crossfire between armed forces and the RSF. We have speculated, like maybe if the army withdraws and leaves it to the RSF, would that bring peace? But I've told you now what RSF reign has done in the rest of Sudan. So it's actually leaving them to that terror. So unfortunately, the army is trying to recapture the city, and civilians are lost in the crossfire. They're unable to escape, and food is running out, and the situation is extremely dire.
Okay. I want to touch on South Africa's, I want to come back to South Africa's role, Prof, because South Africa, when the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky came, there was many discussions that South Africa is seen as an honest broker. You've welcomed the statement from DIRCO, but should President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's seen not only as the G20 president, number one, but also seen by many African leaders as this honest broker, has he done enough, in your view, to go ahead and try and not just broker peace, but also hold those accountable for what we are seeing across Sudan, which, when you read the Geneva Convention, is equal to genocide?
It is, and I would really like the South African government. I mean, this statement, as I said, is an incredibly positive move. But I would love for the South African government and South African society to become more involved. We many times refer to South Africa's political history in trying to find lessons for ourselves. So we believe that South Africa can play a major role, but to play a major role, they have to really fully understand the dynamics of what's happening there. And the same way that we had negotiations in South Africa, while still condemning apartheid, we can still have negotiations in Sudan while condemning the RSF. So that is the role that we would like to see South Africa play, and then to really understand the dynamics of what happens in army-controlled zones versus what happens in RSF-controlled zones. I'm not a politician, but I can say in the army-controlled zones, shops are open, hospitals are functional, and children go to school. In the RSF-controlled zones, there's rape, there's theft, there's killings, and there's terror. It's as simple as that. And it would be amazing if, in addition to the South African government statement, that this was also recognized, not as something to stop the negotiations or to stop the peace process, but as a recognition of how Sudanese can be supported today to escape this terror.
And that's where I want to come on to, Prof. Osman, because I'm sure there are representatives within the International Relations Department that are well aware of course, what the RSF is doing in many of the civilian areas. You've mentioned it, in army control zones. All the requirements which are against the Geneva Convention is being currently conducted. So how would you, as an ordinary Sudanese citizen, bring this to government's attention to say, take what is happening in Al-Fasher, but not just a statement of condemnation, but actually finding the true perpetrators of those crimes that are being committed in these areas? Do you feel that there was maybe a gap left in the statement in terms of actually pointing towards the real perpetrators of these crimes?
Yes, but it's important to note that I'm also encouraging a civilian-led dialogue, which is what South African government is trying to do in this very noble effort. So I don't want my words to appear like I'm not also calling for that dialogue. But the same way that we engaged in dialogue with apartheid without ever praising it or equating it. You know, I don't think the apartheid authorities were in any way equated with the resistance movement.
Yeah.
So that it is really as simple as that. You say that there are officials that understand it.
I'd like to think that they understand it, Prof.
Yeah,
I'd like to think.
It's very complex. I actually don't believe that the world properly understands what's happening in Sudan. So it's not just the South African government. So maybe there also needs to be more engagement with Sudanese on this matter, so that when the government formulates future positions and interventions, they really understand what Sudanese have gone through. And it has been brutal because of the RSF, and no one, including ourselves and our families, was spared.
Prof. Osman, this dialogue, and I'd like to think you're going to be part of it because you play quite an influential role amongst the Sudanese diaspora, not just here in Gauteng, but across the country. When this dialogue does occur, and if DIRCO is potentially going to facilitate it, how important is it that you've mentioned it right now, this complexity that maybe these authorities may have of the civil war becomes simplistic? Can that happen in these dialogues?
First of all, my influence is not that big, but thank you. Thank you so much. And there are people, you know, that are politically oriented that would be in a much better position. But I do participate in kind of society to society dialogue and communicating what is happening in Sudan to the broader society. That is something that I do. I think that we need to fully understand what's happening there, and that cannot happen without speaking to Sudanese who have been affected by it. But the other thing is there's also priorities. So today, my priority, and I believe that world's priority should be to save the people of Darfur in general, that's Western Sudan, and the people of Al-Fashir specifically. That's the priority. And if that priority entails, I want to find a tactful way to say this, but if it entails removing the RSF to be able to get aid into these communities, that must happen. And it's just, it's a fact. You know, we try and evade it to appear like we have equal opinions on both and so on. But no, if we leave them to the mercy of the RSF, this is a human tragedy. In my mind, it's like leaving Gaza to the mercy of the Israelis. So it's exactly the same. I mean, people, as I said, have resorted to eating animal feed. I have read at least in 2 places that some people, and of course they died, and there's a lot of deaths because of the famine, but they resorted to eating the foam of mattresses because there was absolutely nothing to eat. So that is how bad the situation is. So what's my priority now? It's not to negotiate with the RSF, it's to stop that atrocity.
Prof. Osman, always good having you, and shukran so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, really appreciate it.
That is Professor Amira Osman, who is the chair for South African Research in Spatial Transformation at the Tshwane University of Technology, and also a Sudanese citizen. Important that while the genocide in Gaza is occurring, there's also one that is happening in Sudan. And we hope that if the Sudanese-led dialogue happens, that this can translate to action, that is a ceasefire, and most importantly, the safety of the Sudanese citizens. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus from myself, Hospital, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. You can catch all of these interviews on our YouTube channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.